Welcome to the Top Order Podcast, World Test Championship final review time on the Top Order Podcast. The first of two podcasts hitting the airwaves this week from us. We've got the Ashes preview coming up as well later in your podcast feed. We're going to give some props to the victor, Michael, over here. We're going to talk selection for the game. Was the toss really important? Key players through the final. The pitch, the controversy around Shubman Gill and his Twitter faux pas. We'll also talk overrates, the format of the tournament moving forwards, and Lippy will get some New Zealand news in there somewhere as well. All coming up on the Top Order Podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, just the three of us again this week. Get well soon to Rajiv, who's at home nursing a bit of man flu. But we are going to manfully get on with the podcast this week. We've got a couple of episodes coming up as we trailed in the little preview. So we've got the Ashes. So we'll try and avoid too much in terms of build-up for the Ashes. I'm sure we're going to not be able to contain ourselves broadly with that.
We'll try and keep it under control.
Through the course of this. But we do want to look at the World Test Championship final. So obviously played at the Kennington Oval. I think we're going to go through a whole bunch of factors that, look, I think we've got to really put into context as well. I think I read a stat that this is the first Test match that's been played at the Oval in the month of June. Maybe not ever, but certainly in recent history. So I think, that's going to have a little bit when we talk about probably selection, when we probably talk about the importance of the toss, and when we talk about the sort of way the pitch behaved throughout the course of the final. But Baldy, first and foremost, mate, congrats. How does it feel to have probably one of the worst actual physical trophies in world sport?
You don't like it?
I don't mind
think
it.
it's bloody horrible.
Oh, just because you've never won it. I love the Mace.
I don't mind it. I think it's fine. There are a lot. I mean, it's not a Stanley Cup, is it? But it's not a bad trophy to have. I don't mind the Mace. It's different. It's unique. It's exciting. It's better than the toilet bowl, which is what you play for in the whatever the Australian A-League football is called. It looks like a toilet seat. So yeah, there could be worse. It's a good one to have. I like having it.
Wow. And look, I'm not bitter about this. We are the only country, after all, that's hosted the World Test Championship, and we'll continue to do that for the next one as well.
At least 2025 will be at Lord's.
But I think this is a landmark moment for the podcast, though, isn't it? This could be, because Baldy predicted Australia would win.
It doesn't count,
and
though.
Australia won.
Well, I've been told
I've been told
midweek that it doesn't count if you predict a victory for your own team. So
I think I said that to you, didn't I?
Yeah.
What I
so
mean,
I'm still betting zero in terms of predictions.
The juju's gone. Like, you guys can actually stop. So when we do get to our Ashes preview, you don't have to both pretend now that you have to pick the opposition team. Like, please just...
I bet we still do.
Yeah, I bet you still do.
It could be that, yep.
But surely we can...
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, we can now say you can actually back your own team on this podcast. And it can come true.
Wow.
Dreams can come true.
This one certainly has for Australia.
Well, look, we'll come on, I think, to all the runners and riders and key moments throughout the course of the final. But we've got a little bit of a running order. So I think, let's start at the start of the game. So selections first. We talked about this in terms of, what all those permutations were. I think, let's be honest, it was a lot easier for Australia. There wasn't really too much. And the minute Josh Hazlewood was ruled out injured,
it made it easy.
It was a pretty straightforward conversation. So look, I don't think we'll spend too much time on Australia. They got their
already
selection
spent too much on it.
Absolutely spot on. But India, where do we want to start? Lippy, you've probably got the most notes. I think I've got the second most notes, and Baldy maybe the third most.
I've got no notes on selection.
All right, so let's start with you, Lippy, with the most notes.
I mean, I'm always going to go to Ashwin, but I think that's where everyone's kind of conversation is going to go. And look, in their defence, I think you look at that pitch on day one, you look at them winning the toss, and you think, and even you look at that first hour, and you think playing four seamers isn't ridiculous. But I think what that selection did is it was playing the conditions, playing everything else instead of just playing your own game. And I think that's what New Zealand did so well in their lead up, is that when they actually went on their successful run, they just picked their best bowlers. They picked their best players. We even saw it in India when Australia was mucking around, not picking Travis Head because 3 years ago he had a bad record in India or whatever it was. I think you just pick your best players. And I even think that around not picking Kishan, actually, playing Bharat ahead of him. Bharat, to be fair, again, did a really nice job with the gloves. I thought you might like to talk about that a little bit later. But I think just it wasn't a very positive selection. I don't think. Ashwin's been their best bowler. He's been the best bowler of the World Test Championship stats wise. Why is he not there?
It's inexplicable to me. If you had asked Australia, who would you rather have play, Bharat or Kishan? Australia would rather have Bharat play than Ishan Kishan. Who would you rather have play? Some combination of Yadav and Thakur, or would you rather have Ravi Ashwin play? Australia would pick that, give me both Yadav and Thakur all day, every day, instead of having to face Ravi Ashwin, particularly wouldn't have faced him in the fourth innings, but, a wearing pitch that started to do a little bit day four.
It was turning even on day two, I think. Started... Lyon was getting turned to Jadeja, picked up that wicket late on day two. Really, really important.
And Australia, if they hadn't nicked off early, Australia have a lot of left-handers in their lineup.
Yeah.
And an off spinner, a finger spinner, taking the ball away from a left-hand dominant lineup, particularly given Travis Head made 163 in that Test match, is probably a pretty telling outcome.
Yeah, look, you're not going to get anything different from me in terms of the talking points. Certainly, I thought Bharat did keep really, really well. The ball wobbled a little bit, as the Dukes is prone to do in England. There was a little bit of variable bounce throughout the game as well, and we'll probably come on to that when we talk about the pitch. But, he kept really well, 5 catches. He probably took one catch that you would say was he took a decent diving catch.
That was nice.
That potentially, a guy who is a lesser keeper in Ishan Kishan may not have gloved, but it wasn't a specky. It wasn't a 1 out of 100 catch. It was probably an 80%er for a decent keeper. But I think when you then look at the game situation when Bharat came into bat 6 for 152 and India ended up getting nearly 300. 50 or 60 from him at that point in that game makes that first innings deficit a lot different. It then probably creates some questions. And then I think when you then look at the way that India used their seamers, Thakur was, underused in that second innings. And I think, the Boardy's already mentioned it. But again, you've got a guy that turns the ball away from the left-hander. Travis Head obviously had a fantastic innings and played almost, I've seen it referred to as Trav ball throughout the course of the week. But look, again, if he'd have been an option to come on and bowl early to Travis Head, that was one of the criticisms of Travis Head and why he didn't get picked in the subcontinent for Australia was his pedigree against spin. Would that have been a different question with Ravichandran Ashwin turning the ball away from him? And then Alex Carey as well, 48 in that first innings, really, really important little knock. And then obviously in the second innings, batted really, really well as well. Left-hander, has struggled against spin. Seemed to have one plan, which was sweep the shit out of everything.
I saw some terrible stat about his reverse sweeps. Played 14 reverse sweeps and been out 4 times or something. 16.
14 times.
Yeah.
I think it's entirely possible that he's played 14 reverse sweeps and been out to that shot 16 times. Put it away, Alex.
Absolutely. And look, I'm sure we'll come on to that in the Ashes preview as well, with England changing their spin options up because they haven't got any, whereas India's had an embarrassment.
They've got
of
almost
riches.
too many.
Let's talk a little bit about the pitch and the toss. What are our thoughts? Obviously, looking back in hindsight, it's a pretty good first innings batting performance, but India obviously deciding to bowl first and stick Australia in. Would they change that, do you think, going back?
Oh, well, they've lost the game, so you would have to think that they would probably revisit that decision. But, in both innings, they had Australia in a little bit of trouble early doors, right? And their opening bowlers, as much as we've lambasted them in terms of the overall selection, it's not their fault, but, their opening bowlers at the top of the order knocked Australia off, knocked Khawaja off in both innings, exposed a bit of a flaw in his technique, perhaps, or something for him to work on. And they had Australia, a couple down and in trouble in both innings. So they did their job. Ultimately, the pitch flattened out, and as soon as it did, the lack of variety in that Indian tack, which comes back to selection, really did hurt them because they weren't able to throw different looks at Australia once we were set.
And I think actually that first hour, is there any thought on the podcast that you would? I think you rock up at that, you see that pitch, you bowl first. I don't.
What do you do? What do you do at the Oval, Binksy? Do you look up or you look down?
Yeah, look, I think at the Oval, it's a bat first ground, unless there's what probably India saw on that day. And I think probably the thing that might have made that decision was they were thinking, this is June at the Oval. Normally, the Oval is the last Test match of the summer. It's pretty flat, and it's a batting wicket. You only need to look at the fact that someone like Ollie Pope, his home ground for Surrey, averages 90 odd there in the county championship over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, and that's a little bit about how good a player he is, but it's also about how good the surface is. And you look at again the batters that England have produced that have churned out runs, notwithstanding the likes of Rory Burns, but if you go back to the Alex Stewarts, the Graham Thorpes, there's lots of Surrey players who have really churned out a lot of runs on that pitch. So I think they, yes, it's really easy to say with hindsight. I think they've made a mistake there in inserting Australia. I understand why they've probably done it. It's a big game, it's a one-off game, and they've probably thought, if we bowl really, really well, we could have Australia in a little bit of trouble. But look, Steve Smith and Travis Head, who we'll come on to, and even David Warner to a certain extent,
played a good innings until he hit one and got himself out.
Yeah, so ultimately, I think we got to give a lot of credit to Australia, because it wasn't easy.
I think
to get through that first day.
They bowled really well in that first hour. I think that might have been a bit of a tactical error, really, to bowl Siraj and Shami for so long together.
Yeah, they didn't bring one of them off and give them another chance.
Exactly, because the two of them bowled so well together. And, we're talking now, I mean, they did end up having them 70 odd for 3 and in a position where they could start taking advantage of that position. But I think they also they could have had them like 30 for 3 as well. They were very unlucky. They bowled a lot of wicket balls that just didn't find the edge. Siraj in particular, I thought was really, really impressive. Hit Labuschagne on the gloves. I think hit guys in the head. Hit Travis Head in the head in the first innings. Hit Green in the shoulder as well at times. He was sort of able to bowl that ball where it was going past the edge, and also then run in, hit the deck, and still find some juice. So yeah, I thought he did a really, really nice job.
Yeah, and look, just really strange when you got 4 seamers. You've got the ability to rotate your seamers a lot better than they did, and they didn't. They kind of put all their eggs in that opening basket, and then it didn't really work out for them through the course of that first day. But Bordy, let's talk a little bit about Australia's batting. I know you're not always forthcoming in praise, but Steve Smith has played what you'd describe, I suppose, as a pretty old-fashioned Test innings, 121 off lots and lots of balls, striking at about 45. But the other end, you got a guy, Travis Head, who strikes nearly 90, 163 off 174 balls, and certainly the way he went through the gears late on that first day, and then into day 2 was fantastic, wasn't it?
Oh, very, very impressive. Travis Head continues to impress in overseas conditions now. There's lots been talked about as regards how effective he is in Australia and how ineffective he is overseas. This is his first century overseas in Test cricket. He's finally got that ticked off on his scorecard, and he's away. I think he's going to be as influential this English summer as he was in the Australian summer down under. He was our best bat in Australia. He's proved now that he can bat in subcontinent conditions. He's proved to himself he can bat in English conditions, albeit batting friendly ones. And look, I mean, you have a look at some of the facts around Travis Head. Australia have not won a Test match without Travis Head since he debuted. So every time Australia drop him, they don't win Test matches. Every time he plays, well, not they don't always win, but they've not won without him since he made his debut.
I'm going to hazard that will change this summer.
It will likely change 3 times this summer.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. His average now is higher than Justin Langer, Mark Taylor, and Mark Waugh.
Wow.
Combined?
Not combined. The only Australian cricketer that has a higher average and strike rate right now, Adam Gilchrist. Adam Gilchrist, then Travis Head.
Wow.
So what you're saying is that Travis Head needs to keep wicket
and continue to score at the rate that he does. He's the difference maker for Australia, really. When we look at the Ashes preview, he is a difference maker for Australia, and he took this game away from India, right? At 3 for 70, there was hard work to be done. He changed the game for Australia by coming in and basically scoring at a run a ball and taking that game completely away from India. At 3 for 300, it was really one team in the box seat after day 1, and that was Australia.
Yeah, and they never let go. You're right. They took that initiative, and that from that point on, the game was never done. And it happened immediately as soon as he came out to bat as well. He just went. He basically. I really like the way that he he sort of scored his boundaries in two zones, particularly early on in his innings. If anything was any width outside off stump, he cut it behind point. If anything was on his legs, he whipped it into the leg side. Apart from that, he just worked his singles and kind of saw off the good balls. But it was very, very calculated, but also in a way that just it was aggressive without even really having to be aggressive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we probably don't give enough credit to the fact that partnership, if you think about it, from 3 for 70 odd to 4 for a 360 or whatever, you've not quite collapsed in a heap after that, but you've lost 6 wickets for 100, which I think just shows the importance of that partnership,
big partnership
in terms of setting up.
Is the difference between the two teams at the end of the day?
Yeah, you look at the rest of the game. I don't think anyone else got over 300 today in the whole game.
Yeah, I kind of looked at that because I think we want to talk a little bit about the pitch, and there's been some, I wouldn't necessarily say criticism, but I think if you read between the lines, Rohit Sharma's not particularly happy with, the whole circumstances around the final pitch, format, umpiring, and we'll come on to that. But let's be honest, this pitch has produced 1,200 runs over, best part of 4 days, so 300 runs a day. They're all thereabouts at just over 3.5 and over. So I don't think we can probably put too much.
Pitch is fine.
Yeah,
I thought the pitch was actually fantastic. Because when I look at a pitch like that, when I look at Test cricket at the moment, you want something that has something in it for everybody, and that pitch absolutely did that. If you ran in and bowled, no matter 50th over on the third day, if you ran in hard, put it in the right spots, bowled well, there was something in it for you. You could get seam, you could get bounce. But if you dug in, you could score runs, and you could score them quickly at times. So I thought that was the perfect balance between bat and ball that we often don't see in Test cricket at the moment.
It ticks all the boxes for me. Was there anything for the bowlers in it on day one, early doors? Yes, there was. Were hundreds scored by batters? Yes, there was. Did both teams have an equal opportunity to score runs in the Test match? Yes, they did. Was there something in it for the bowlers in most parts of the Test match, i.e. was it flat for 4.5 days? No, it wasn't. Was there something in for the spinners? Yes, there was. When was there a result? Was there a result on day 5? Yes, there was. So, you can criticise the particulars about the pitch if it wasn't quite to your liking, but if you think about genuine good Test outcomes, regardless of which side you support, that pitch has got something for everyone, as Stu said.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the, of the controversy throughout the course of the day. Little Freudian slip. I mentioned 4 days. We've got 4 days worth of overs. So
yes,
overrates.
We'll come to that.
Overrates is probably one of those things. But we've got Shubman Gill in a little bit of hot water. So I think overnight he has essentially been fined. I think that no one's going to really
extra 15%. All the Indians got fined 100% for the overrates. 100% of their match fee, and Shubman got an extra 15% for his social media antics.
Which I think is you're not going to get any arguments here. I don't think for that fine.
Not from me. I mean, you can't really go on and do that. Regardless of how you feel and how frustrated you are with the situation, I think regardless of whether you think it's out or not, you can't be. I think when you're going to do that, this is inciting.
It's dissent.
Yeah, it's dissent. You know exactly what you're doing. Yeah, it's frustration and it's borne out, and you can't do that, unfortunately, in this day and age, no matter if you're saying it directly to the umpires or projecting it to the world, which is perhaps even worse, really, in terms of dissent.
Yeah. What do we think about the actual decision? Any arguments that was a clean catch at this table?
I don't really think so. It looked pretty good to me. I mean, I don't know. I actually don't know the rule as much as... Baldy might say it to me, but
I have it here.
The thing that Kettleborough kept saying that stuck in my mind is he is in control of the ball, and that's the way I sort of view catches. I think did a similar thing happen with Kyle Jamieson, I think, in the last World Test Championship final. Pretty sure he put the ball down on the ground, but I thought he was in control of the ball, but that was given not out at that time. But I've been in those positions. I used to field at gully all the time. You go in, we always say you think you know whether you've caught it or not. I don't know if that's always 100% accurate. You do. You have a pretty good feel. But you don't know if you've grazed the grass. You don't know if you've, just caught it. I think all of the cheat stuff is ridiculous because...
We'll get onto that.
Cameron Green is claimed the catch because he thinks he's caught it. I don't think Cameron Green thinks at any second that he hasn't caught that. So there's cameras around. He's entitled to go up for that catch. I don't think there's any suggestion in my head that he's cheating or doing anything wrong. But yeah, I think that's a clean catch, basically, as I've just said, because I agree with Kettleborough that he had control of that ball, even if maybe some of the ball is touching the grass, which Baldy might be able to fill us in on what the actual letter of the law says about that.
Here's the letter of Law 32.2. A catch, and I'm paraphrasing some of this here. Furthermore, a catch will be fair if any of the following conditions applies. 32.2.2.1, or 33.2.2.1, I should say.
Strap in, viewers.
The ball is held in the hand or hands of a fielder, even if the hand holding the ball is touching the ground, or is hugged to the body, or lodges in the external protective equipment worn by a fielder, or lodges accidentally in a fielder's clothing. Much more riveting when read by Stephen Fry, but there you have it. It goes on to talk about how the ball is struck and etc. Now, the act of making a catch shall start from the time when the ball first comes into contact with the fielder's person and shall end when the fielder obtains complete control over both the ball and his or her own movement. So Cameron Green has satisfied both of those clauses, and as Alison Mitchell pointed out in commentary, if his hand is under the ball, part of the ball can touch the ground if it's in his hand. If his hand is not under the ball and the ball touches the ground, then the ball is deemed to have touched the ground, right? So a couple of things here. One, no one asked Cameron Green if he didn't catch it, right? Australia appealed. The umpires were asked to uphold an appeal. It was referred to the third umpire. The third umpire made a decision. No one asked Cameron Green so it's not up to him whether or not it's out. And the accusation by some members of the crowd that he was a cheat, are you a cheat if you nick off and don't walk?
Well, I don't think so.
It's the equivalent. You're asking an umpire to make a decision. Now, if in the scenario where you nick off and stay where you are, often you know that you've hit it and you continue to stay where you are. The fielder that claims a catch where they are maybe even, let's say, unsure, they are not knowingly breaking the laws of cricket and still asking the umpire to make a decision, right? So under no circumstances can you assess that Cameron Green is a cheat. For all of the cricket fans who...
When Baldy looks directly into the camera, you know it's serious.
Yeah.
For all of the cricket fans who forget that going to a stadium does not mean you get to abuse a player or an official, remember this. Imagine yourself in an elevator. Next to you are your daughter, who's 7, and your mother, who's 85. Opposite you in this elevator, which is stuck and the doors are closed and you can't get out, is the opponent who you wish to address. Next to him are the Klitschko brothers, Vitaly and Vladimir Klitschko.
Jeepers.
They are his bodyguards. If in that situation you still feel compelled to call someone a cheat or something like that, then so be it. But until you're prepared in that scenario to make those decisions in that circumstance, keep it to yourself. You are allowed to barrack for your own team. I will even allow in some circumstances to you boo an opposition if they're going to kick a goal or something like that.
That's just a bit of fun.
Under some circumstances, but you're not allowed to call someone a cheat, particularly when it's obvious. If you take the partisan viewing of the situation out, he's not cheating. He's not neither willfully or accidentally.
We just put that to bed.
Let's put it to bed.
I think we can move on. It's no different to appealing for an LBW, is it really? You're not sure about that. You go up, you ask the umpire to make a decision. And as you said, I think Cameron Green has not willfully done anything, and there's 27 million cameras in the ground. The Klitschkos have fallen on hard times though if they're doing private security for your 85-year-old mother. But anyway,
no, they're doing for Cameron Green.
Oh, for Cameron Green. Okay.
Well, we're talking about catches, and I think maybe this can segue into talking about Australia's next Prime Minister Scott Boland. Can we talk about Steve Smith's catch? Because maybe I'll lose my New Zealand passport by talking about this, but I've watched that Steve Smith catch of Virat Kohli about 1,000 times. It was just an absolutely tremendous piece of fielding, and anyone if you want a display of a game-changing moment, I mean, I know we're going into day 5 already. We've moved on to day 5. We all the neutrals, I'm sure, and all the Indian fans wanted to see Virat Kohli score 100. He was on 49. It would have made for a fantastic day. The way that Steve Smith moves his body to actually go and grab that with 2 hands Oh, I mean, that just fantastic. Baldy, were you watching that live?
I wasn't watching it live. And the interesting thing for me that comes out of that test match, if I step back a little bit, is that Australia had a real rocks and diamonds performance with their catching behind the wicket.
Day 3, terrible.
Day 3, terrible. Cameron Green takes 2 really, really good catches, one of them controversial, one of them not. And Steve Smith takes that screamer. But actually, Australia's slips catching is really inconsistent at the moment and has been for some time. It is actually a bit of a concern for me. I have 2 or 3 concerns over the performance of that Australian side, despite the fact that we won this test match, and that's really one of them.
No, I'm just trying to find the catch.
Right.
And I thought it was a nice height.
Oh, yeah, it's a nice height. But honestly, the pace that comes... Yeah, to get to turn your body and get 2 hands to it. I mean, maybe I'm alone in that.
You're not alone.
Binksy's trying to view it here. So maybe me and Baldy can just have a chat about Scott Boland while he looks at this.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree. I think it's a reasonable grab, but it's a nice height, and he's had a long time to see it because Kohli's played a long way outside of his body. Don't get me wrong, good catch. But as you say, I think there was, there's been, I think in this World Test Championship, Australia over the course of the last 2 years are somewhere in the middle to lower half of the catching table, aren't they? They're around sort of 75% when the nations near the top are in the sort of early 80%.
Or New Zealand are close to 90 in terms of their slips catching. Australia are well below the standard that they will have set for themselves behind the wicket, that's for sure.
Let's talk a little bit about Australia's bowling though, because we've praised their batting and we've sort of talked about the Indian selection and things, but we haven't really talked about what Australia did with the ball, because this batting lineup for India, on paper at least, is very, very strong. They, you could argue
in good form,
in good form, but coming from the IPL, very different. But players like Shubman Gill, who everyone has been talking about as the next big thing, comes in, leaves that one to Scott Boland. It jags back a mile. He looks a fool, but actually, you go and you look on the replay of that.
It went a long way.
It pitched half a metre at least outside of off stump. I think he's well within his rights to actually leave that. Pujara's maybe not a little bit later on in the day, but what do you talk to me about Boland? Because I think for everyone I'll talk for myself. I've been watching the Scott Boland story, I guess, loving it, because to me he's sort of been your first class battler who's coming in and getting your opportunity now and kind of just doing so well and kind of making a very strong case now in particular to be picked ahead of these guys who've got 250 test wickets, the Starks, the Hazlewoods, even Cummins. I think Boland bowled the best out of all of those seamers in that match. What's he bringing from an Australian side that you're so impressed with?
Well, I think we talked about it in the preview show for this World Test Championship final, and it's the reason why I really like that Australia went with him to open the bowling instead of Mitchell Starc. In that early on in a batter's innings, he asks questions of the batter every single ball, and he does just enough with the ball to make it do a little bit. Sometimes it does a lot, in the case of Shubman Gill's dismissal, but he asked Shubman Gill to play just about every one of the 10 or so balls that he bowled to Shubman Gill before he bowled them out, right? So he asks questions of a batter early in the innings in an area of the wicket where there's some uncertainty as to whether or not you go forward or back, and he just does a brilliant job of being metronomic in his consistency in those areas early on in his spell. He also is excellent to you, like, no matter where it is in his spell, he's always excellent to the new batter. He's played 8 test matches now. On 6 occasions, he's taken multiple wickets in an over. The only person that's done that in this World Test Championship cycle, other than him, is Ravindra Jadeja. So, like,
Jadeja or Ashwin?
Jadeja. Jadeja has, I think, 6 times got multiple wickets in an over. So he just asks so many good questions of you, whereas opposed to someone like Mitchell Starc, who could bowl you the one unplayable ball, but as we saw in this test match, can also feed you 5 runs and over, right? So it's that consistency that he brings to the Australian team that I think he's going to put England players under pressure in the Ashes, and he's certainly put the Indian top order under pressure in this test match.
Yeah, the pitch I think helped him a little bit. There was a little bit of nip in there, and he's just about the right pace and probably the right length actually on that wicket with a little bit of variable bounce. Look, I'm worried about him from an Ashes perspective, and we'll come on to that in the preview. But I think,
let's save some of that chat for the preview because I think it'll be interesting.
But I think what we've probably got to look at is fantastic performance over the 8 test matches that he's played. Let's see what happens when he gets with a Kookaburra ball on really, really flat wickets. Maybe that's at Adelaide. in the home summer. Maybe that's, in the West Indies. Maybe that's in India or Pakistan at some point. That's going to be really whether or not he's Glenn McGrath or Stuart Clark or whether he's Andy Bickle.
Yeah. What I think stands him in really good stead is he's played enough domestic cricket now to know in those different conditions where the top of off stump is. Like he often, even in the Indian conditions, he brought his length back a little bit, so he was still hitting the top of off stump. In Australia, he bowls full to hit the top of off. In England, it's kind of somewhere in between, right? But he knows that he can adjust his length and still be consistent and have that ball targeting in or thereabouts the top of off stump. So when you do leave, you can get yourself in trouble.
And you putting your fingers out like that for, holding the ball, or for anyone who's listening on the podcast, they showed a really nice, some nice footage of basically his grips for setting up Kohli for that dismissal, and the way that he's just subtle variations in the way that he changed
in the second innings.
Yeah, in the way that he changed his hands.
That's a lot more about a shit shot.
It was a loose shot. It was a loose shot, but it came from all those questions that he was asking. It came from the fact that he'd been bowling maiden after maiden or tight economical overs, and there was a loose ball. There was the opportunity to score, but it wasn't, because he was setting him up, trying to, just subtly change his finger position to nip the ball away and took the edge, and there you go. So, yeah, fantastic stuff.
Well, look, we're approaching probably the last sort of 4 or 5 minutes of the pod. We want to talk, I think, about overrates briefly. The format of this World Test Championships come into criticism after the fact, so we can definitely have a little conversation about that. First thing on overrates, look, it's a difficult one because it winds me up every single time that we've got gloves coming onto the ground, we've got all kinds of stoppages left, right and centre, but it hasn't really detracted, I don't think, from the spectacle of this game. Well, do we just need to shut up about it?
That was the question I was going to ask you guys, because I think you guys are much more... I don't like seeing anybody getting shortchanged, and I think that's probably the frustrating part, that we're missing out on cricket. But I actually don't notice it. I don't feel like I notice it when I watch the game. I don't feel like the game is slower in any way. I don't feel like the fielding team is slowing the game down. At times, I feel like the batting team is the one that's asking for drinks and asking for helmets, and
it's absolutely both. It's absolutely both teams. But I think if we look at, I think it was the first 2 hours of the Test match, I think, and I mentioned this, I think, on our Slack channel. There was 11 overs in each of the first two.
That feels very poor, obviously, and I don't understand why they can't bowl those overs, because obviously a spinner, I was someone who got through my overs quickly, but I don't think at club level I've ever been in a team where we've struggled to that degree unless we were trying to slow the game down on purpose. So I don't understand why it's happening, really.
Yeah, look, I think the thing for me, and I've got to actually, probably disagree slightly around you don't miss anything. You're paying probably in England £100 to go and watch a day's Test cricket. I think it's actually slightly more in at Lords and perhaps even the Oval in London. So you're paying a decent amount of money. If you go and watch, for example, 75 overs in the first day, when you should be easily getting 90 and probably even 95 overs into a day, and you might miss someone, batting the next day, and seeing a little bit of both innings, I think quite rightly you can feel shortchanged, that you've not got your money's worth. You're almost, you should be entitled to come in for the next hour the next day to get your money's worth. You wouldn't go to a concert and we've run out of time, we're not going to play the encore. You don't get to hear New York at a Frank Sinatra gig, and you're not going to do that anyway now. So look, I do think...
I get your point.
I do think that this is an entertainment business, as people keep saying now. So I think...
Are you not entertained?
But think about it though. 15 overs, if England were batting, that's near 100 runs at the moment. That's the difference between a 300-run day and a 400-run day.
They're providing enough entertainment in a day, and I think both of these two teams did as well.
So put it into perspective. 15 overs, you would have missed the second half of the IPL final. So look, I'm being a dick about it, but ultimately it's a lot of cricket, and I think there's some real simple things that can be done. I think.
Money's not doing it though, is it?
No, it's
not. They clearly don't care about money.
Money's not doing it. It has to be, for me, If we want to take it seriously, and my stance is let's take it seriously, it has to be in-game penalties, and I think they have to be relatively draconian. So I've heard about 5 runs and over and all this kind of stuff. I'd be an advocate of that. I think if that doesn't fix it, literally for every over that you're short, you lose a wicket in your next innings, or the team that's batting gets to bring another batter back in. I guarantee that if you make the penalty severe enough, you will see them bowling.
It worked in T20 cricket, didn't it?
And there's just some little things for me. We're seeing a lot now, and rightly so, head injuries and concussion. We need to take that really, really seriously. The amount of times now where, these guys, Steve Smith, travels with a kit bag the size of my kit bag full of gloves, okay? He could maybe take 2 or 3 pairs of gloves out and have an additional helmet in there. And I think that when you're batting, just like you've got your 37 pairs of gloves, your 14 spare bats and sweatbands, Cameron Green changes bloody pads in this test match. You should have a spare helmet that is set up, ready to go, so that when you get hit on the head, it doesn't take 20 minutes to go and get a grill that's the same as your grill, or a helmet that's the same as your helmet. And then simply there's plenty of opportunities for drinks. There's drinks on the hour, there's drinks when there's a fall of a wicket. If you can't go an hour without a drink, or go and field at third man so you can have a swig from the massive eskies that are there full of bloody Gatorade, I don't know what the problem is.
I completely agree. There have to be penalties on both sides. So, I mean, you and I have talked about it before. We need to have a Steve Smith rule that every time a pair of gloves gets run out, other than a fall of a wicket, costs you 10 runs. Right? You want
your own individual score.
Yep, off your own score. You want new gloves, 10 runs. Fair enough. Like, it'll stop overnight. You don't bowl your overs in a session, 12 runs and over. Not 5, 12. Make it 12. Make it 15. Make it something where the teams go, holy crap, actually, we need to bowl
the
our
captain's
overs.
suspended for the next game. I agree.
No, that hasn't worked either.
That hasn't worked either. Or both, right? Have both. Why not? But you do need to make allowances for genuine medical emergencies and all the rest of it, and that's fine.
And that's where the third umpire is looking at the front line for the no ball. He can have a stopwatch as well, and he can figure out what stoppages in play are. Look, we could rant all day about this.
Yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about the format. So Rohit Sharma has come out, and look, I thought Pat Cummins' comments in response were brilliant. He said, well, AFL and NRL have a grand final. This is a grand final.
We talked about the Olympics as well.
Yeah, the Olympics, you run a gold medal race. And then I think, part of the question that's got to go back to Rohit Sharma is, well, you won a 3-game series for the World Test Championship. All right, sweet. We'll have a 50-game IPL instead. What do you think?
Well, I wonder. Well, I don't wonder, but it's the BCCI that he's got to be having a go at, really. Surely, isn't it? Like, if he wants India to have a lead into the World Test Championship, and I sympathise with him that they have had to come straight from a T20 tournament that they're all going to play in and that they all care about. It is very important to them to play in that tournament
and win it,
and be and succeed yourself personally in it, so that you get financial security and set up for and even Indian jumpers next time those teams are being selected, because the IPL is important for all of those reasons. Then the BCCI, actually, if they care about this tournament, the World Test Championship, need to set it up so that they don't go straight from the IPL to that. I don't really think I think the world media has reacted to Rohit's comments by basically going, well, it's your decision, like your board's decision.
And they knew when the final was. Yeah. It's not like he's commenting around, it doesn't have to be in England and it doesn't have to be in June. Well, no, but this one was.
Yeah.
So Pujara went and played county cricket. Now, granted, he's not going to get too many IPL contracts the way that he bats, but he's gone and prepared. So make a decision around what's important to you personally, number one. But then secondly, absolutely have that conversation with your board and say, look, this wasn't good enough preparation for us.
And it's set up for the next cycle as well.
Yeah.
They know it's going to be at Lords. I don't know if they know the exact date, but they'll probably know somewhat around where it's going to be. So, let's see in 2025 if they actually care enough, because I think that's on the BCCI. And I think Rohit has a right to be frustrated about that. But actually, that's on the home board for them to make a decision and go, well, the IPL can be a week earlier. I think in terms of 3 tests, we all want it to be 3 tests. But unfortunately, T20 cricket is taking over. There's leagues.
No room.
There's
in
no
the
room.
schedule for 3 Test matches over 5 weeks. You
Yeah.
really need to have it over 5 weeks. Who's got 5 spare weeks in their cricket calendar?
Well,
We would love-
They don't need it over 5 weeks, but yeah, I see your point that they're going to need a reasonable window. If you look at how quickly these Ashes Test matches come,
They're thick and fast.
yeah.
But I mean,
If
you're
you
not
want
going to
a
be able
warm-up
to
game
run them
and you
back.
want
to-
absolutely.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, look, guys, we'll nearly wrap the pod up here. Lippy, I know you want to talk a little bit of New Zealand news, don't you? So New Zealand contracts are out. Trent Boult is probably one of the main talking points that's come out of that. Do you want to give us a quick rundown of that?
Yeah, well, look, because I actually don't think there are a huge amount of talking points. So, I mean, the three sort of players that picked up contracts last year, Finn Allen, Mark Chapman and Blair Tickner all kind of retained their contracts. They got them when the guys stepped away from their contracts last year. The only real decision, I guess, that happened was Adam Milne has come in and Ajaz Patel has lost his contract once again. He's sort of been in and out for the last 3 or 4 years. It's unfortunate for him, but I think the way that New Zealand does this point system, he's never going to be selected in this, unfortunately, because we have a 2-test tour to Bangladesh. But apart from that, it's a diet of one-day cricket and T20 cricket leading up to the ODI World Cup. And then we have home tests in the next summer that he's not going to play in, even if he's regarded as the number one spinner. And looking back at Pakistan, he kind of lost his spot as the number one spinner because he took his opportunity probably better than Ajaz did in that series against Pakistan. So it's very unfortunate for him. Jimmy Neesham is again not selected, which I do find interesting. I don't. Brian Stronach came out, the New Zealand performance manager, and said explicitly it was because he didn't accrue enough points in the system. And basically, for anyone who doesn't know, that what New Zealand cricket does is they go and they rank, I think, the top 20 in all formats for how many games they think they will play for that next 12-month cycle. And they've decided that they don't think Jimmy Neesham is going. Tests are ranked higher, and Jimmy's not in that, so he kind of loses out there. But I don't think that's a great reflection on his World Cup chances, actually, because if they don't think he's in the top 12, 13, 14 ODI, in the ODI list, then yeah, I think he's, if not on that plane, I think he's probably going to be the last picked in terms of that ODI squad, which may come as a bit of surprise to people if that happens. On the flip side to that, we seem to now have some resolution to the Trent Boult situation in terms of, I think they'd said David White had come out. We talked about this on the podcast a few weeks ago. David White had said pretty much if Trent Boult is fit, he'll be in the World Cup squad. Gary Stead has now said that. Paraphrasing his words, but he's basically said we've put him down on the team list. We've talked to him. As long as he's not injured, he'll be on the list. I think the really encouraging phrasing around the media release was that Trent Boult's been offered a casual contract and will play for New Zealand when both sides feel it's suited. Whether that means he is available for, I think everyone's kind of New Zealand fans are hanging on with hope that he might be available for some of our home tests against South Africa and Australia. I think the South Africa one will come a little bit too soon. He's playing BBL and then goes to the Dubai T20, which I think kind of be too close. I would love to see him play in those Australia tests, but again, we kind of saw what happened last time around, so who knows. But at least I think the wording around, it basically suggested we're positive about what Trent, last week I talked about how I think the New Zealand need to think strategically about all this stuff. They need to be flexible and for their best players. It looks like that might be on the horizons and that they will try and get Trent Boult into the mix if he's committed and wants to be there. So, yeah, let's watch this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Watch this space. And I think what's fascinating is whether anyone else is going to get a casual contract, because it sets a dangerous precedent in a way with, the proliferation of white ball cricket we're making an exception for a great New Zealand cricketer. Are you going to make an exception for a not so great one in the future?
I think they're going to have to going forward. I think they're going to have to. I think New Zealand cricket is going to have to make exceptions for their best players as long as they're committed to playing for New Zealand when New Zealand wants them.
Awesome. Well, look, that does just about wrap up this episode of the Top Order podcast. As we said at the top of the show, we will be back in your feeds over the course of the next day or so with an Ashes preview as well. Our mouths are watering, aren't they? The prospect of that Edgbaston test match. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us all at the Top Order podcast here in Auckland. We'll see you soon on the next show. Good night.